In this chapter, we'll start off by deconstructing how to sharpen our images, and then we'll apply our knowledge as well as a few more sharpening techniques. Alright, well let's go ahead and open up the file DisneyConcertHall2.psd, and this is the image that we'll be using to demo how sharpening works. In the background, we have a detail shot of the Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles, California. And then above that, we have a layer titled Sharpen. So here's the trick with Photoshop. If you want to learn how to do anything in Photoshop, create a grayscale, modify it, and you can teach yourself just about everything inside of Photoshop. So what we're going to do here is teach ourselves how our different sharpening settings work. Now that I've clicked on that layer, I'm going to press Tab and move my sharpen image over to the left because I don't really need the rest of Photoshop right now. Are you with me? Next, I'm going to go to my filter drop-down menu and choose Sharpen and then Smart Sharpen. And here's why. Sharpen, we don't really know what's happening. Sharpen edges and sharpen more, we don't have settings. We can't dial in the amount. And then Unsharpen Mask is actually now built inside of Smart Sharpen. So this is going to be our best option. So go ahead and click Smart Sharpen. Now, once the Smart Sharpen dialog window opens up, we have a number of different things we can do. For starters, let's take it to basic. And then let's crank up our sharpening amount. So we're going to exaggerate things here in order to see how this works. And I'm going to start off on Gaussian blur here. Now, one of the things you're seeing here is that the way Photoshop sharpens, it actually doesn't sharpen edges, but it seeks to add contrast to edges where there's difference. So you'll notice that in my grayscale, this gray is pretty similar to the background, so there's no halo or there's no sharpening. There isn't a darker border on the inside and a brighter on the outside, yet as this fans out and becomes more different than the background, there's a stronger halo on the outside, the darker border there, and a brighter one on the inside. And this sharpening technique comes from an old photographic technique where you take two images and you offset them a little bit, and what it does is it gives the illusion of sharpness. So we're not actually sharpening our images, but what we are doing is exaggerating contrast where we find differentiation, which makes the image more sharp. Well, so far we can see that, and this is what it looks like with Gaussian blur. Now, this is identical to Unsharpened Mask. Now, let's see what happens if we take this to Lens Blur. Check this out. This is awesome. Whoa, see how it just brought everything in? How cool is that? What it did is it went from our old school sharpening like this, where everything was big and kind of flares out, to something that is much more smart, hence the name Smart Sharpen. Good naming convention by Adobe. So we have something that is much smarter. Another thing that we can see here is that things are sharpened in different ways. Because this text is bigger, we're seeing more sharpening, i.e. more haloing. And because this text over here is small, we're seeing much less. Now, in the past, I've said completely ignore more accurate, because if we click that on, what it is more intense. And you can see it exaggerates noise and it doesn't look as good. Yet I got this tip from Deke, who's a great guy. And here's a tip coming from him. I have pretty much disregarded this. And he was saying that he has found use for more accurate when items are really small. And so you're going to see what it's going to do, because my sharpening is so small down there, I can't even really read that word. When I click this on, it's going to really help out those areas that are small. Now, I've obviously exaggerated the amount of sharpening that I want to do, so if I take this down, we're going to see it's going to help out in those situations where you have really small details that you need to bring out. Let's briefly look at some advanced settings here for Smart Sharpen. I'm going to go ahead and click on the Advanced tab and then go to Shadow and Highlight. And what I'm going to do is take these all down to 0. And what's really cool about Smart Sharpen is I can dial in the amount of sharpening that I want. So I'm going to go back to my Sharpen window and I'm going to exaggerate the sharpening. I'm increasing the amount and the radius. Also, as a side note, some of you who've been using Unsharpened Mask have noticed that the threshold is now gone. It's built into the algorithm that's doing the sharpening, so we don't even need to dial it in. We just have two settings, amount and radius, which is pretty cool. So I'm ready to jump to my Shadow tab, and what I'm going to do here is simply take this all the way up, and you're going to see that it's going to take off a ton of the sharpening. It's diminishing my shadows. Did you see how that was happening? Let's take this back. So there you can see there's the shadows. Look at the shadows around the halo. For example, let's look at the P on Sharpen. See the black shadow? It's creating a highlight, a bright line, and then a dark line, and then I can dial that out. Now if I go to my highlights, check this out. Increasing my fade amount, tonal width. I'm pulling that all the way out. So it's really interesting. I have the ability to pull this out or dial in a certain amount of that highlight. Here I have much less of it. I'm fading that. I can fade out more of it or less of it based on my highlight. The radius typically in Photoshop is reach. That's how far this is going to reach into what we're doing. So you can see here, even with this drastic amount of sharpening that I had applied, I could probably dial it back to get something decent, although I wouldn't want to start with that high of numbers, of course. But you can see right here, that's not horrible sharpening, and it started out pretty horrible. So these advanced settings help me to just reel in the halo, because, you know, the halo is the dreaded effect that we get when sharpening. So what you want to do is when you see your halo, just pull it back. We'll also do a little bit back in Photoshop with blend modes and opacity. Yeah, here in the Smart Sharpen dialog window, we obviously want to dial in some of our settings as much as we can. In this movie, I want to talk about blend modes and sharpening. Now, here we have a couple layers for us. I have one layer that has some real exaggerated noise. I over-sharpened this image, yet I've done this in order to illustrate a point. And the point is, a lot of times what happens with digital capture is that we get noise in our shadows. And when we sharpen our images, that noise is exaggerated. Here you can see there's all kinds of noise there. And this is currently on a blend mode of normal. If I take this to a blend mode of luminosity, what's that shortcut? Grab your move tool, V, shift minus. I'll take it to luminosity. That's a great way to jump there. When you have the move tool selected, you can press shift plus or minus to scroll through your different blend modes. Yet enough on shortcuts. Let's get to this cool stuff here, where now that we have this on a blend mode of luminosity, as opposed to our blend mode of normal, you can see it shift there. So here's luminosity, here's normal. Let's zoom in even farther just to convince you even more. See all those different colors? Kind of interesting in an abstract way, but not very interesting in a photographic way. So let's go ahead and press shift minus. Now I'm back to luminosity. What it does is it's only blending the luminance value. So the image is going to be sharp, as you can see here, although it's over sharpened, yet it dealt with that problem of exaggerating the noise. So when you're sharpening your images, be sure to change your blend mode to luminosity. Now you hear some people say that that blend mode is now built into Smart Sharpen. It is. It does a much better job, yet not good enough. We still need to take our blend mode to luminosity. I'm going to turn that layer off and then turn on this layer. Here's a layer with a little bit less sharpening, and I'm getting the good old dreaded halo. And what I want to do is remove that halo. Now I can dial that in with Smart Sharpen, yet there's sometimes where I just still have that halo, and I want to pull that out. Well, what I can do is use my blend modes. Clicking on this grayscale, if I take this to a blend mode of darken, what happens? Well, it's not affecting the bright tones over here, it's just affecting the darker tones. I'm going to do that with this halo no more layer by taking my blend mode to good old darken. Check that out, that's pretty sweet. So you can see that that is now successfully removed that haloing. The sharpening may be a little bit too strong here. Let's look at our before and after. No, that's pretty good. And then let's go back to our normal blend mode. The haloing is just out of control. Taking that to darken really helps out. So it may be worthwhile to experiment a little bit with those blend modes. And obviously the logic of those blend modes is built into Smart Sharpen, yet there's times where it's still helpful to dig into our blend modes on our layers to make that even better. Let's apply our knowledge and let's sharpen an image with a person in it. In this case, we're going to open up the file storwig_sophia.psd. What we want to do is sharpen this image, so let's copy our background layer by pressing Command or Control J and then renaming the layer Sharp. Next step that we're going to take is we are going to take our blend mode to luminosity, because we know we're going to need to go to that blend mode so that we don't exaggerate any noise. Now from here, what I want to do is apply some sharpening to the image using Smart Sharpen, and then I'm going to do some masking and a couple other things. So I'm going to navigate to Filter, Sharpen, Smart Sharpen. And when I'm doing the sharpening, I want to make sure that I can see some of the important parts of the image. In this case, the eyes are pretty important, the lips. So I'm just going to dial in a specific amount. I'm clicking on the image to look at my before and after, see how I'm doing. Then on my advanced settings, what I'm going to do is look to pull out some of the haloing, especially around the eyes, because you'll see that real drastically in the eyes. Let's exaggerate this so I can tell you illustrate what I'm talking about. See how there's this halo around the eyes? I've pulled it back a little bit, but that doesn't look very good, right? Because the eyes are one of the most important aspects of an image, right? So, because that's what we're interested, that's what we look at first. So we want to make sure that's in good shape. So I'm going to pull this amount way down. Typically your amount's going to be somewhere around 100, and your amount and radius is going to vary depending on the resolution of the image. This is a pretty low-res file. I've sized it down so that I can include it in the training. So my sharpening is going to be pretty subtle. A lot of times what happens when you're sharpening for the web, your radius is going to be even smaller because you're working with such a smaller file. You want a pretty high amount and a real low radius, so you're distributing that pretty evenly across the image. So I'm going to experiment a little bit with this one because it is a lower res file, and a lot of times what you want to do with your sharpening is have sharpening that is subtle yet significant. You don't want it to be over the top, or you don't want anyone to notice it. We'll click OK. That looks pretty good. Let's look at our before and after. And then zoom in. One of the things I'm noticing is it's exaggerating the texture of the skin, and I don't like that. I don't want that to be the case, and that happens a lot with skin, and here's why. Skin has a lot of different tones in it. If we zoom in on a patch of skin, what you're going to see is there's just a ton of different tones. So what's happening when it's sharpening is it's trying to make these brighter ones brighter and the darker ones darker and create a little bit of contrast. That doesn't work very well for us. So what we're going to do here is zoom back out to 100%. And then create a mask, Option-Alt-click the mask icon. So I've masked away all of the sharpening, and then with the brush, I'm going to bring back some sharpening. So I definitely want the eyes sharp, so I'm going to go ahead and paint with white. I'm going to sharpen those eyes up. Because I have my color palette set to grayscale, I can also change the amount or the intensity of the sharpening that's coming through. In this case, I'm painting with not quite white, because I want to sharpen up the hair a little bit. And the nice thing about using this grayscale slider is that it doesn't layer on top of each other. It's a fixed amount. Let's look at our before and after so far. So I'm seeing a little bit of detail in the hair. Want to get the lips down here, those cute lips. Okay, so far so good. We've sharpened what we need to sharpen. Now a lot of times this is what you're going to need to do with your images, is apply selective sharpening, because obviously we don't want this hand sharp because that's out of focus, or the background sharp because that's out of focus. So we're going to need to really dial it in. There are times where our masks will be more specific, other times where they'll be a little bit more general. It depends on the depth of field and also what we want sharp. Now before we leave this file, I want to smooth the skin out just a little bit. I know this is a movie on sharpening, yet one of the ways that we can make something look sharp is making things around it relative to what's sharp, not sharp. Does that make sense? So I'm going to blur the skin out a little bit. The way I'm going to do that is click on my background layer, press Command J to copy that, and bring that to the top of the stack. Next step's going to be to go to Select Color Range, and I want to select the skin, and you know, that looks pretty decent right there actually. Click OK, and create a mask. Now, if I were to show you this mask, it's going to look a little weird because I just have certain areas of the skin. I don't have all of the image. And it's good because it's not selecting the eyes or the mouth or the darker tones. Now I can click in this layer and navigate to Filter, Blur, Surface Blur. And what's going to happen with surface blur, if we zoom in, we can see that here before and after. It's smoothing the skin out. That obviously doesn't look very good, yet it's a pretty good starting place. Click OK. My opacity is going to come down probably below 50% somewhere. Let's just look at our before and after. It's subtle, yet what it's doing is it's just blending together these different tones of the skin without being over the top or exaggerated. It's not going to draw attention to itself. It's also nice because based on the color selection, you'll notice that my mask is masking in this blur to specific areas and not to other areas. So the areas that are brighter have a little bit more blur. The areas that are darker have a little bit less based on my mask. And you know what? That wraps up this movie. Tab F to go to full screen view mode. And if that doesn't make you smile, hey, I don't know what will. See you in the next movie.